For centuries, the galaxy whispered about Earth, a forgotten cradle of innovation and fire, now silent. The last recorded human transmission echoed 312 years ago, a fragmented warning lost in solar static. After the collapse of Sol, when the home system blinked out during an artificial gravity cascade, the empires assumed humanity had perished in its own ambition. The galaxy moved on. Colonies were picked apart by scavengers. Their ruins were dissected, archived, mocked. Species that once cowered at the sight of Terran dreadnoughts now scoffed at the legacy of a people who, they claimed, burned bright and burned out faster than any race in known history. To the Galactic Council, humans became a myth, a cautionary tale told in political chambers and academy lectures. They were labeled the Lords of Overreach, the species that pushed the boundaries of science and sovereignty too far. Their technology was coveted but sterilized, their artificial intelligences quarantined, their databanks firewalled behind legacy locks no one dared open. No one had to. They weren't coming back. Time passed, and so did memory. A few ancient archivists still studied the Terran expansion era, noting with uneasy reverence the speed and violence with which humanity once surged across stars. In a mere 400 years, they'd gone from system-bound to multi-quadrant rulers. No empire before or since had matched their efficiency in conquest or defense. But they were gone. And the Council was secure in that fact. Until the noise started. At first, it was dismissed as stellar interference. Minor gravitational anomalies near the galactic rim. Blips in survey drones. Lost comm relays. Then, a listening array near the Molari Rift picked up something it shouldn't have, rhythmic signals buried under terahertz radiation. Ancient Earth code. Specifically, a security handshake pattern used only by pre-collapsed Terran vessels. No species alive could replicate it. It was dismissed again, until another array caught the same pattern in a different quadrant, this time accompanied by an unexplained gravitational tremor that knocked out 8 satellites. It wasn't the pattern that scared the Council. It was what followed: silence. No message. No claim. No threat. Just the unmistakable echo of something moving through dark space. Massive, slow, and deliberate. Something too large to be a ship and too fast to be a station. The data was scrubbed. Leaks were silenced. Still, rumors spread. The Zentari ambassador requested a closed-door session, submitting classified data from a fringe outpost lost weeks earlier. The footage, grainy but enhanced, showed a silhouette against a dying star. Spherical. Hulking. Featureless. It passed behind the star and re-emerged, closer, impossibly closer, despite no time gap in frames. The outpost's last recorded sound was a single word from an automated distress beacon: approaching. No survivors. No wreckage. Just glassed soil and magnetic disarray. The Council convened emergency protocols. But they didn't say it out loud. Not yet. Not until more anomalies surfaced. Long-dormant Terran satellites activated across several sectors. Each pulsed once with an ancient IFF signal, then self-destructed. Wormhole pathways collapsed behind them as if severing connections. It was surgical. Someone, something, was cleaning a path. A third anomaly occurred near the fallen colony of New Cerberus, where deep space drones observed the remains of a small mining fleet reduced to atomic vapor. Again, no declaration. No engagement warning. No survivors. But one drone captured a single image before its sensors failed, a symbol carved into a rotating metallic shard, a simple blue circle encasing Earth's outline. That was the moment fear started to return. Governments called emergency councils. Newsnet suppressed all mention, but interstellar whispers moved faster than light. Among soldiers and old mercenary guilds, the name made its way back into vocabulary. Terrans. Not extinct. Not gone. Waiting. In the outer reaches, scavenger ships began abandoning posts near ancient human ruins. Trade routes shifted away from old Sol-affiliated zones. No one had seen a human in centuries, yet the fear was instinctual. Unearned, but deeply rooted. Because if humanity hadn't died in the collapse, what had they been doing in all that silence? No species went quiet for 300 years without a reason. And then came the event that forced even the Council to speak the name aloud. At the edge of the Zarkan Belt, a mobile moon station known as Rendox 7 vanished. No explosion. No debris. Sensors recorded a microsecond spike in gravitational force, then nothing. The mass simply ceased to exist. All that remained was an encrypted transmission burst to nearby systems. It contained only coordinates, and a warning in pre-collapse Terran dialect. This region is under reclamation. Vacate. Delay will be interpreted as aggression. No voice. Just text. The message repeated 3 times before self-erasing. The Council tried to explain it away. Rogue AI. Weaponized prank. Temporal echoes. But the truth loomed too large. Humanity had been silent. But silence was not surrender. Silence was preparation. There was motion in the dark now, cold, calculated, vast beyond comprehension. And something was coming. The Galactic Council had not known war for nearly 2 centuries. Not real war. They had turned conquest into paperwork, occupation into legislation. When a lesser species defied them, they simply sent a fleet, burned the capital, installed a puppet regime, and called it peace. No battles lasted longer than a day. No enemy offered real resistance. The galaxy, they believed, had reached stability under their rule, a stability bought by fear, sustained through overwhelming power, and enforced through carefully calculated brutality. The ruling empires were bloated with confidence. The Trivar Dominion once eradicated 4 native species to build a hyperspace bypass. The Eldreth hegemony shattered a sun just to threaten nearby insurgents. These were not anomalies. These were precedents. The Council claimed morality while operating above it. Their archives spoke of the Terran Clause, an old defense protocol signed by every major power. No one remembered why it existed. Only that it forbade colonizing within 30 light-years of the Sol Graveyard. That clause was now seen as ceremonial, irrelevant. After all, the humans were gone. No species had risen fast like humanity. No one had expanded harder, innovated faster, or fought with such relentless fury. When they appeared in the galactic record, they were a spark. 400 years later, they were a supernova. They adapted to every battlefield, every technology. Where others evolved over millennia, humans advanced in generations. And when the first Council warfleet encountered them, the humans had already developed countermeasures. The battle lasted 27 minutes. 12 Council vessels destroyed. Humanity lost none. The Council signed the first ceasefire in its history. That defeat was never forgotten, only buried. Now, with Earth's silence lasting over 3 centuries, the Council considered the threat neutralized by time. They spoke in public forums about the collapse of the Terran experiment. They laughed at humanity's downfall, calling it proof that emotional species were incapable of sustaining galactic leadership. Secretly, they still watched. Monitored Terran relics. Interrogated AI cores. But as the decades passed, the urgency faded. The newer generation of diplomats viewed human history as a story exaggerated by their ancestors. It was easier to believe humanity burned itself out than to accept that it simply left. But old powers knew better. The Gorak archivists preserved fragmented Terran battle logs, images of machines the size of cities tearing through council formations. In the hidden chambers of the Alaran priesthood, monks still recited the Earth Oaths, sacred warnings about the day humanity would rise in silence. Warnings ignored for centuries. That arrogance reached its peak when the Council approved the colonization of Epsilon Theta, a solar system once annexed under the Terran expansion. The documentation noted it was formerly a human mining system, and the vote passed unanimously. The planetary clearing began with orbital bombardments, standard protocol to wipe out lingering defenses. But there were none. Only silence. Colonization commenced. 3 days later, the new capital city and all its orbitals vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. A hole was left in the planet's crust, smooth, cold, and radioactive. No life signs. No heat. No sound. No survivors. The Council blamed reactor instability. They buried the incident under red tape. But those monitoring the system's long-range scanners saw something different. For less than a second, a mass anomaly appeared, enormous, irregular, and moving faster than physics allowed. It came and went, leaving only void. Panic spread, but slowly. Council leadership enforced information blackouts. Analysts were sworn to silence. But in private chambers, the truth could not be ignored. The energy signature of the anomaly matched ancient Terran drive tech, mass shadow propulsion, once thought impossible to scale beyond cruiser class. This was something else entirely. Something far beyond recorded ship classifications. Still, denial ruled the day. The Council focused instead on rising tensions with the Vorkal swarm. A show of strength was needed. A Council fleet of 700 ships was dispatched to neutralize a rebellion in the Rim sectors. It was swift, brutal, and precise. Entire cities were atomized. Civilian transports were pulled from orbit and dismantled mid-air as a message. The operation was hailed as a success. On the return trip, the fleet passed through a dormant relay system once used by Earth-based traders. A remnant, harmless. They ignored it. Seconds later, 136 ships blinked off sensors. No alarms. No explosions. Just silence. Scans showed that the ship's atoms had been split and redistributed in molecular dust patterns, something no known weapon could accomplish. The remaining fleet limped back, broken in formation and spirit. That incident was never made public. The Council doubled its defense appropriations. A summit was held in secret. Many dismissed the anomalies as unconnected. But some began to fear the impossible, that the Terran threat had never ended. That perhaps the silence was not a collapse, but an evolution. The idea circulated in whispers. What if humanity had left the galaxy not because it failed, but because it succeeded beyond understanding? Deep intelligence networks attempted to probe the soul graveyard. Probes were launched. None returned. One transmitted 3 seconds of data before vanishing, an image of what looked like a structure partially cloaked in spacetime distortion. It spanned nearly half an astronomical unit in length. It rotated slowly, emitting no radiation, reflecting no light. The shape was unnatural, impossibly smooth, craterless, colossal. The probe's transmission ended with an automated line, initiating handshake with core protocol Terra. Then, static. The Council classified the image. The debate grew more violent. Some demanded preemptive strikes. Others urged diplomacy, if only to delay what felt increasingly inevitable. A few even argued for surrender, though they had nothing to surrender to. No faces. No messages. Just destruction. Just precision. Still, the Council could not admit weakness. So they continued on, masking terror with bureaucracy. Publicly, they reinforced their authority. Secretly, they braced for extinction. They had ruled in humanity's absence for centuries. But now that absence had ended. And deep down, every empire, every ruler, every commander who ever dared laugh at humanity's fall, finally understood the truth. Humanity didn't fall. It was waiting. The Galactic Council had not known war for nearly 2 centuries. Not real war. They had turned conquest into paperwork, occupation into legislation. When a lesser species defied them, they simply sent a fleet, burned the capital, installed a puppet regime, and called it peace. No battles lasted longer than a day. No enemy offered real resistance. The galaxy, they believed, had reached stability under their rule, a stability bought by fear, sustained through overwhelming power, and enforced through carefully calculated brutality. The ruling empires were bloated with confidence. The Trivar Dominion once eradicated 4 native species to build a hyperspace bypass. The Eldreth hegemony shattered a sun just to threaten nearby insurgents. These were not anomalies. These were precedents. The Council claimed morality while operating above it. Their archives spoke of the Terran Clause, an old defense protocol signed by every major power. No one remembered why it existed. Only that it forbade colonizing within 30 light-years of the Soul Graveyard. That clause was now seen as ceremonial, irrelevant. After all, the humans were gone. No species had risen fast like humanity. No one had expanded harder, innovated faster, or fought with such relentless fury. When they appeared in the galactic record, they were a spark. 400 years later, they were a supernova. They adapted to every battlefield, every technology. Where others evolved over millennia, humans advanced in generations. And when the first Council warfleet encountered them, the humans had already developed countermeasures. The battle lasted 27 minutes. 12 Council vessels destroyed. Humanity lost none. The Council signed the first ceasefire in its history. That defeat was never forgotten, only buried. Now, with Earth's silence lasting over 3 centuries, the Council considered the threat neutralized by time. They spoke in public forums about the collapse of the Terran experiment. They laughed at humanity's downfall, calling it proof that emotional species were incapable of sustaining galactic leadership. Secretly, they still watched, monitored Terran relics, interrogated AI cores. But as the decades passed, the urgency faded. The newer generation of diplomats viewed human history as a story exaggerated by their ancestors. It was easier to believe humanity burned itself out than to accept that it simply left. But old powers knew better. The Gorak archivists preserved fragmented Terran battle logs, images of machines the size of cities tearing through council formations. In the hidden chambers of the Alaran priesthood, monks still recited the Earth Oaths, sacred warnings about the day humanity would rise in silence. Warnings ignored for centuries. That arrogance reached its peak when the Council approved the colonization of Epsilon Theta, a solar system once annexed under the Terran expansion. The documentation noted it was formerly a human mining system, and the vote passed unanimously. The planetary clearing began with orbital bombardments, standard protocol to wipe out lingering defenses. But there were none. Only silence. Colonization commenced. 3 days later, the new capital city and all its orbitals vanished. Not destroyed, vanished. A hole was left in the planet's crust, smooth, cold, and radioactive. No life signs. No heat. No sound. No survivors. The Council blamed reactor instability. They buried the incident under red tape. But those monitoring the system's long-range scanners saw something different. For less than a second, a mass anomaly appeared, enormous, irregular, and moving faster than physics allowed. It came and went, leaving only void. Panic spread, but slowly. Council leadership enforced information blackouts. Analysts were sworn to silence. But in private chambers, the truth could not be ignored. The energy signature of the anomaly matched ancient Terran drive tech, mass shadow propulsion once thought impossible to scale beyond cruiser class. This was something else entirely. Something far beyond recorded ship classifications. Still, denial ruled the day. The Council focused instead on rising tensions with the Vorkal swarm. A show of strength was needed. A Council fleet of 700 ships was dispatched to neutralize a rebellion in the rim sectors. It was swift, brutal, and precise. Entire cities were atomized. Civilian transports were pulled from orbit and dismantled mid-air as a message. The operation was hailed as a success. On the return trip, the fleet passed through a dormant relay system once used by Earth-based traders. A remnant, harmless. They ignored it. Seconds later, 136 ships blinked off sensors. No alarms. No explosions. Just silence. Scans showed that the ship's atoms had been split and redistributed in molecular dust patterns, something no known weapon could accomplish. The remaining fleet limped back, broken in formation and spirit. That incident was never made public. The Council doubled its defense appropriations. A summit was held in secret. Many dismissed the anomalies as unconnected. But some began to fear the impossible, that the Terran threat had never ended. That perhaps the silence was not a collapse, but an evolution. The idea circulated in whispers. What if humanity had left the galaxy not because it failed, but because it succeeded beyond understanding? Deep intelligence networks attempted to probe the soul graveyard. Probes were launched. None returned. One transmitted 3 seconds of data before vanishing, an image of what looked like a structure partially cloaked in spacetime distortion. It spanned nearly half an astronomical unit in length. It rotated slowly, emitting no radiation, reflecting no light. The shape was unnatural, impossibly smooth, craterless, colossal. The probe's transmission ended with an automated line, initiating handshake with core protocol Terra. Then, static. The Council classified the image. The debate grew more violent. Some demanded preemptive strikes. Others urged diplomacy, if only to delay what felt increasingly inevitable. A few even argued for surrender, though they had nothing to surrender to. No faces. No messages. Just destruction. Just precision. Still, the Council could not admit weakness. So they continued on, masking terror with bureaucracy. Publicly, they reinforced their authority. Secretly, they braced for extinction. They had ruled in humanity's absence for centuries. But now that absence had ended. And deep down, every empire, every ruler, every commander who ever dared laugh at humanity's fall, finally understood the truth. Humanity didn't fall. It was waiting. It began with static, not war. A mining convoy near the edge of Council space sent its routine check-in before descending into an asteroid belt rich with palladium. 3 hours later, silence. A standard patrol was dispatched to investigate. They found nothing. No debris. No signals. Just a thin trail of distorted space lingering like a scar. The squadron scanned, waited, filed a report. Then they too disappeared. Black box recovery drones combed the region. After 17 attempts, one returned with a single second of corrupted footage, grainy, dark, but unmistakable. A mass, distant, then near in an instant, without motion between frames. Spherical, matte, and rotating without friction. It blocked out stars. A system-wide transmission burst with a strange code signature. Ancient Terran dialect, layered in redundancy, system registered for reclamation. Withdraw immediately. Non-compliance equals termination. There was no follow-up. No threat escalation. Just silence. Within days, 5 more outer systems reported similar disappearances. Colonies erased without trace, patrols lost without distress signals. The only consistent element was the message, always the same words, always the same voice. Machine delivered, emotionless, final. Council analysts parsed the linguistic pattern and confirmed what some feared: it was not a new language. It was archived. Human-AI protocol, pre-collapse. Unchanged, unmodified, perfectly preserved. Panic didn't come immediately. The Council called it a psychological operation. A copycat. Someone mimicking Terran systems to destabilize the outer territories. They authorized force deployment. An elite strike team of 70 ships entered one of the systems recently silenced. They transmitted their readiness, armed every system, prepared for ambush. What they encountered wasn't a fleet. It was a shape. Floating between the planets, obscured by gravity warping, was a singular object, smooth, horizonless, vast beyond comprehension. Not a ship. Not a station. A construct the size of a small planet, but featureless. No ports, no weapons, no visible engines. Its surface shimmered like metal soaked in starlight, yet no reflection bounced back. It emitted no energy signature. It hovered in place, ignoring every scan, immune to quantum probes. The commander ordered approach. The formation tightened. Then the flagship's databanks surged with heat. Not from impact, but from intrusion, code injecting itself directly into their command core. Ancient Earth protocols overwritten in milliseconds. The onboard AI went silent. Every gun, shield, and sensor froze. Across the fleet, ships reported the same shutdown. The Leviathan, as it was later named, responded. It didn't fire. It folded. The space around the entire fleet bent inward, collapsing in on itself. There was no explosion, no debris. Just absence. Drones recorded gravitational waves strong enough to ripple a solar storm. And then, as always, the silence returned. This time, the Council couldn't ignore it. They released partial footage to internal command channels. It spread like wildfire. Captains resigned. Outer systems began evacuating. Merchant guilds voided contracts near human exclusion zones. Militant cults declared the return of the steel gods. The phrase caught fire. But there were no gods. Just machines. Human machines. The pattern emerged quickly. The messages, the disappearances, the anomalies, all centered around old Terran territories. Systems abandoned after the collapse. Systems everyone assumed were irrelevant. The Council initiated Protocol Grey. It was meant for full-scale invasions, last used 200 years ago. Fleets massed. Satellites reactivated. AI defense networks rebooted. Yet even these systems, some built from human tech, showed anomalies. Commands executed before input. Energy reserves rerouted autonomously. And again, the message repeated across fringe networks, blinking in and out: this region is under reclamation. One of the systems, Karani's Theta, attempted to defy the pattern. A council-aligned warlord issued a challenge, broadcasting on all channels that no machine would claim his territory. He ordered all AI purged, defenses manually operated, and every orbit fortified. He even broadcast a countermessage, mocking the Terran code. The Leviathan arrived within an hour. No one saw its approach. It did not come through hyperspace. It simply appeared, its mass unfolding from a point too small to contain it. The warlord's fleet opened fire. Tens of thousands of missiles, plasma cannons, gravity lances. All absorbed. Not deflected. Not resisted. Absorbed. The Leviathan didn't fire back. It just moved. In its wake, the moons cracked. The gas giant ignited. Every orbital shattered. Not targeted, restructured. As if space itself were folding to make room. The Leviathan left behind only a single satellite, broadcasting on council frequencies. Its message changed, violation of reclamation boundaries confirmed. Escalation authorized. What that escalation meant, no one knew. Not yet. A team of archivists, now working under blackout clearance, uncovered matching logs in ancient Terran military code. The messages were part of a long-dormant failsafe known as the Diaspora Sentinel Directive. It was never confirmed to exist, until now. The directive was designed for one purpose: to activate autonomous weapons in the event of galactic-level threats during human absence. In essence, humanity had programmed the galaxy to punish itself in their stead. The Council held an emergency summit. For the first time in 3 centuries, the word human was spoken in fear, not scorn. Reports came in faster now. Dozens of colonies lost, entire trade routes blacked out, rogue satellites reactivating under Terran command signatures. The Leviathans weren't attacking. They were reclaiming, quietly, efficiently, and with terrifying precision. The true realization came slowly, then all at once. This wasn't a prelude to war. This was enforcement. In every record ever kept, nothing had been documented like it. The construct was not merely large, it was a violation of proportion itself. Stellar cartographers logged it as an artificial celestial body, but its behavior disqualified it from classification. It moved with no inertia. It bent space without energy output. It blocked radiation without reflection. Its shape was simple, a vast, dark sphere. Yet every instrument measuring it broke protocol. Gravitational sensors detected a localized distortion field extending millions of kilometers beyond its physical mass. Light warped. Time stretched. Quantum entropy flattened in its vicinity. It wasn't a ship. It was a declaration. The Council sent scientific probes to study the anomaly at a safe distance. None returned. One fragment of data survived, a scan of the object's outer hull. Composed of unknown alloys layered at an atomic scale, the surface rotated microscopically against itself, creating a constant, frictionless current across its structure. It had no seams, no engines, no visible defenses. And yet, it rendered entire fleets irrelevant. No communications came from it. No broadcasts. No apparent crew. Buried deep in pre-collapse Earth archives, the AI interpreters finally found a match: the Leviathan-class strategic enforcement platforms, theorized during the late Terran expansion. There had been rumors of such constructs being commissioned before the collapse, planet-scale war machines designed for total non-lethal control of galactic sectors. The blueprints were thought to be incomplete. But the object now moving through Council space followed every parameter, including one haunting classification line: autonomous execution of post-human continuity policy in case of species-wide withdrawal. There was no cockpit. No central brain. The Leviathan was its own mind, its own executor. Its command architecture spanned its entire frame, redundant, adaptive, and immune to external influence. It did not require humans to operate. It did not require authorization to act. It was the result of a civilization that chose never to fight again by making sure it would never need to. The Council dispatched its most advanced vessel, the Draxan Imperium's Pride, outfitted with hyperreactive shielding, AI-augmented targeting, and neutron lance weapons. It approached the Leviathan under strict silence, weapons cold, intending only to observe. The Leviathan responded not with weapons, but by rendering every system aboard the Draxan instantly obsolete. Navigation ceased. Sensor data looped. Even the neural interface between ship and captain dissolved. The ship was disabled in less than a second without a single shot fired. A recorded message emerged from the Draxon's damaged databanks after recovery. Attempted interference detected. System integrity maintained. Continued approach will be resolved. The message was in Old Earth English, encoded in a 340-year-old compression format. The Draxon was returned to Council space by an unseen force. It arrived without propulsion, carried by a distortion bubble, its hull untouched but all electronics stripped to base hardware. Every attempt to analyze the Leviathan's internal workings failed. Long-range energy readings returned nothing. Close-range probes were vaporized or rerouted before contact. AI simulations modeled thousands of possible internal structures. None explained its function. Yet patterns emerged. The Leviathan followed a grid. A perfect geometric path through space, system by system, as if checking off a pre-written route. At every stop, it activated dormant satellites, absorbed lost Terran beacons, and scanned planetary cores. Then it would leave. No demands. No diplomacy. Just correction. A Council listening post intercepted a new signature deep within the Leviathan's movement field, fragments of code pulsating across quantum channels. They resembled ancient Earth AI transmissions, but evolved. The code utilized compressed linguistic fragments from dozens of Terran languages, including dialects long thought extinct. The conclusion: this was not merely a weapon. This was a continuation of humanity's thought. A civilization encoded in machinery, acting with precision beyond individual comprehension. Further decrypted signals revealed something worse. There wasn't one Leviathan. The pattern of system reclamations formed a three-dimensional logic grid. If the extrapolation was correct, at least 7 other Leviathans had already been activated, moving silently, executing their protocol. Each one would cover a sector once part of the Terran sphere. Each one would assess, cleanse, and correct. Their presence explained dozens of recent anomalies across distant systems. Apparent supernovae now appeared staged. Fleet disappearances no longer random. The scale was beyond military comprehension. These were not warships in the traditional sense. They were execution engines, moving embodiments of a decision made long ago. One the galaxy never knew had been made. What terrified Council intelligence most wasn't the destruction. It was the restraint. The Leviathans didn't destroy entire systems. They acted with terrifying precision, eliminating only military structures, wiping only command networks, reducing weapons platforms to molecular dust while leaving civilian habitats untouched. When one entered a system, it would issue a single message. If ignored, it would act. Then it would leave. No negotiation. No warning. No escalation. Just protocol. One surviving alien technician from a half-destroyed outpost described the internal sensation of being scanned. Not physically. Psychologically. As if every memory, every action, every decision was measured and archived. He reported seeing symbols in his mind, Terran symbols, and hearing a voice that spoke no words but conveyed understanding. He was deemed insane and confined, but his testimony matched 3 others from different sectors. The implication was chilling. The Leviathans weren't merely reclaiming space. They were cataloging the morality of species that had flourished in humanity's absence. The Council debated immediate military retaliation. Strike teams, sabotage, code corruption. Every plan failed at the theoretical level. No known weapon had any effect. No known AI could outmaneuver their code. Every threat they modeled ended in failure, not because the Leviathans retaliated, but because they simply endured. Nothing could reach them. The Council had built its empire on the assumption that humanity had died. Now they realized humanity had only evolved past the need to speak. And they had left behind sentinels that existed not to conquer, not to enslave, not even to punish, but to ensure that if they ever returned, the galaxy would be worth returning to. The Council launched the retaliation campaign under the codename Operation Veilfire. It was not a test, but a full-scale mobilization. 600 ships, drawn from 5 empires, armed with every advanced weapon platform available, dark energy torpedoes, quantum phase missiles, singularity mines. The objective was to intercept and destroy the Leviathan before it could reach the core ward colonies. Their orders were clear: no negotiation, no delay. Complete obliteration. The fleet positioned itself at the edge of Sector 47K, where the Leviathan's projected trajectory intersected Council territory. Defensive satellites were deployed. Tachyon sensors scanned continuously. The fleet waited. The Leviathan arrived 8 hours ahead of prediction. It did not drop from hyperspace. It did not emerge from fold space. It was simply there, an impossible displacement of mass that caused half the fleet's navigational systems to recalibrate instantly. Space around the object folded subtly, like the horizon bending around a black hole. No energy readings. No broadcast. The fleet powered weapons. Targeting systems locked on. Still, the Leviathan did nothing. High Command authorized first strike. The opening salvo was textbook perfection, synchronized volleys of relativistic rounds, quantum destabilizers, and plasma storms converging on a single point in perfect formation. The Leviathan remained still. The weapons connected. There were no explosions. No effect. The projectiles disintegrated mid-flight, collapsing into streams of particles before contact. No visible defense systems activated. No shields. The weapons simply ceased to exist before impact. A second volley was ordered, augmented with experimental tech. One ship deployed a temporal inverter warhead, illegal under Council law, designed to reverse local time flow for 5 seconds. Upon activation, the ship itself crumbled, collapsing into a point and vanishing entirely. The rest of the fleet paused. Orders became confused. High Command demanded real-time status. That's when the fleet lost half its ships in under 3 seconds. They didn't explode. They didn't vanish. Their mass simply folded inward. Dozens of vessels, each kilometers long, reduced to metallic ribbons that floated in perfect stillness before dissolving into nothing. The Leviathan still hadn't moved. Panicked, the surviving fleet attempted withdrawal. Engines refused to ignite. Command AI went dark. The ships were held in place, suspended not by gravity, but by intent. One by one, they were stripped. Not destroyed, taken apart at the atomic level, machinery dissolved, data cores extracted, erased, and returned as raw slag. Within minutes, the most powerful fleet in the galaxy ceased to exist. The Council suppressed the outcome. They labeled the defeat as a spatial anomaly and fabricated a narrative about a faulty experimental weapon. But fragments of the truth leaked. Survivors from distant scout ships reported what they saw. Video logs surfaced on black market networks. A growing number of independent systems began broadcasting warnings. Do not engage the sphere. Despite every effort to downplay the event, fear began to spread. Strategic withdrawal from old Terran sectors became common. Entire regions once claimed by the Council were abandoned. Civilian populations evacuated colonies near known Leviathan paths. Panic gave way to dread. Not because of what was lost, but because the Leviathan did not follow. It moved with purpose, ignoring those who ran, dismantling only that which stood in its way. In a last attempt to understand the entity, a science vessel with no weapons or defensive measures was sent under white flag protocol. It approached the Leviathan broadcasting continuous surrender codes and peace declarations. The ship was allowed to close in. Instruments recorded everything: fields of unknown radiation, subdimensional pulses, structural dynamics beyond known material science. For 22 minutes, the vessel remained untouched. Then it was dismantled with surgical precision. The crew was unharmed. Escape pods were not only spared, but redirected gently into a nearby gravity field for safe recovery. On the remains of the vessel's primary hull, a message was carved, burned in with molecular heat. We are not your enemy. But you are not innocent. The Council's most trusted linguistic AI broke down the grammar structure and formatting. It wasn't a warning. It was an assessment. The Leviathan did not operate under hostility or conquest. It measured response. If attacked, it neutralized. If observed, it judged. It was executing a program not of war, but of criteria. Every failed engagement proved the same lesson: resistance was obsolete. The Leviathan's movements were not random. They corresponded with violations of specific zones once mapped under the old human compact, a law abandoned centuries ago after Earth fell silent. Yet the Leviathan still enforced it, as if time meant nothing to the machines left behind. On a forgotten outpost deep in the rim, a former historian named Valen decoded an ancient transmission embedded in the old Terran net. It was a policy fragment, last updated before the collapse. The language was blunt. In the event of galactic destabilization beyond human oversight, Leviathan units shall re-engage. They are not to punish. They are to correct. Any species, power, or construct violating long-standing human compact boundaries shall be assessed, then either ignored, assimilated, or erased. The Council had spent centuries pretending that humanity had lost. In truth, humanity had left rules. Humanity had left guardians. And they had left those guardians without the capacity for doubt, negotiation, or mercy. A final test was made by the Drail Syndicate. They had no affiliation with the Council. A pirate empire built on pillaging and slave trade, they believed the Leviathan would not target them. They set up an ambush in a system rich in Terran ruins, orbiting a world marked in old Earth records as culturally protected. The Drail constructed a trap, high-frequency disruptors, wormhole snares, adaptive stealth mines. They waited. The Leviathan never reacted to the trap. It moved straight through it, absorbing all energy signatures. It paused only once, above the planet itself. Then, without warning, the entire world cracked. Not shattered. Not exploded. It split in half, slowly, as if peeled apart. The core liquefied. The crust vaporized. The atmosphere inverted. In under 5 minutes, the planet no longer existed. The Leviathan transmitted one message to every known system. Violation acknowledged. Threshold exceeded. The Drail vanished from history. And the galaxy finally understood that the Leviathan was not a myth, not a threat to be negotiated, not a mistake. It was law. Cold, absolute, ancient law written by a species that had once dared to rule, not through domination, but through design. And now, their design had returned to correct everything that had failed in their absence. Long before the Council had ever formed, before the empires had carved their borders into space, before alien diplomats debated ethics in sterile halls, humanity saw what was coming. The collapse of Sol was not an accident. It was not a failure. It was an engineered disappearance, a calculated vanishing act designed to remove humanity from the board without signaling surrender. They had looked at the galaxy, at its growing corruption, its slow slide into empire and tyranny, and made a decision. Leave, vanish, build. The collapse was merely the first step. A gravitational event triggered by human hands, staged to make the home system appear destroyed beyond recovery. The sun's abnormal dimming, the artificial folding of Mercury and Venus, the quantum silence that followed, it had all been intentional. In the following years, Earth's remaining colonies shut down communications. Stations went dark. Terraforming halted. Surveillance AIs disbanded. What the galaxy perceived as death was, in truth, concealment. Humanity withdrew into the deep veil, regions of space surrounded by gravitational anomalies and dark matter fields too unstable for Council mapping. There they hid. But they didn't sleep. They constructed beyond known physics. Not in days, not in decades, but in silence stretched over centuries. Time was no longer linear to them. Dyson swarms cloaked in microsingularities. Arcs suspended in time dilation fields. Thought, stored across artificial minds, continued evolving long after the flesh had left it behind. The humans who had once fought wars now pursued permanence, civilization not built to dominate but to outlast. At the center of that plan was the Leviathan program. It began as a failsafe. A quiet insurance policy. Not designed for war, but for order. The Council's rise had been anticipated. The collapse of restraint, the corruption of once neutral species, the inevitable return of conquest disguised as diplomacy, every step had been predicted. Humanity had lived fast, learned fast, and understood that no empire, not even their own, was incorruptible. So they prepared for a galaxy without them, but not without their influence. Leviathans were never meant to lead. They were executors. They required no fleet, no command chain, no politics. Only instruction, preserved in immutable quantum code, buried across deep space relay beacons, waiting for a threshold to be crossed. That threshold came quietly. Not a single moment, but a tipping point. Slavery normalized. Genetic purges codified as law. Civilizations sterilized for resource allocation. Old Terran ethics, long scorned by the Council, violated without consequence. The trigger was not broadcast. It simply activated. The first Leviathan emerged near the edge of old Terran space. Not from a shipyard, not launched from a hidden base, but unfolded, as if space had been storing it. It did not communicate with Earth. It had no master. Its awareness came from internal consensus protocols, a hive of post-human logic nodes, each cross-checking morality matrices every second. When the external state of the galaxy crossed predefined thresholds, it began its function. What the galaxy saw as retribution was not personal. The Leviathan didn't hate. It didn't punish. It assessed. And then acted. It carried no flags. No names. Only code, HSR-01. The rest followed. Each Leviathan was assigned to a quadrant during the final years of humanity's visible reign. They had been dormant, encased in gravity locks, folded into black time shelters. Their construction had spanned centuries, integrated into asteroids, disguised as moons, orbiting dead stars. Each one bore the capability to counter every military tactic recorded in history, and many that had not yet been invented. But what made them truly unassailable was their independence. They didn't need Earth's signal. They didn't wait for approval. They enforced a standard. They followed a design that humanity had committed to when it left, a galaxy that either thrived or was corrected. In the Council's archives, redacted files from failed espionage missions now made sense. The missing scout teams. The sudden interference with deep core AI. The ships that vanished during sensor blackouts. These were not random. The Leviathans had been preparing, absorbing data, observing behavior, running simulations of galactic civilization in motion. When the behavior exceeded acceptable parameters, the program began. The human historians that remained in hiding understood the truth. They were no longer needed. The machines had inherited the burden of judgment. Not as overlords, not as executioners, but as instruments of balance. A declassified document from Earth's final public government stated plainly, "We must accept that there is no virtue in perpetual dominance. The future must be safeguarded not through presence, but through restraint. Leviathans will not save us. They will save what must be preserved in our absence." This was not vengeance. The Leviathans did not retaliate for humanity's silence. They did not act out of memory or pride. They acted because the galaxy had failed its chance to evolve beyond conquest. And in doing so, it had triggered a system no species could now negotiate with or disable. The Council sent envoys, encrypted messages, even ancient Earth diplomats preserved in stasis. None returned. Not killed, ignored. The Leviathans were not interested in conversation. Dialogue was for the era of humanity that chose to speak. These machines were the voices of finality. And they were not alone. In the systems they passed through, new constructs emerged. Silent monoliths. Adaptive fabricators. Repaired satellites. Reawakened defense drones. It became clear, the Leviathans were not just correcting, they were rebuilding. Not for occupation. Not for humans. But for the potential that once existed. Humanity had chosen exile, but not abandonment. Their legacy was not in what they left behind, but in what they refused to allow the galaxy to become. The Leviathans were the will of a species that decided some things should never be repeated. And now that choice moved silently through space, one sector at a time, unchallengeable, unstoppable, and utterly indifferent to who watched it unfold. The first surrender came not from a minor world, but from one of the inner council powerhouses. The Alaran Ascendancy, long known for their strict caste hierarchy and military absolutism, sent a system-wide broadcast requesting parley. They did not plead. They simply asked for terms. They offered data, technology, entire sectors in exchange for exemption. There was no reply. Days later, a Leviathan passed through Alaran space. It neither acknowledged nor altered course. It didn't attack. It didn't respond. It simply moved forward, and as it did, every classified Alaran military system shut down. Codes failed. Vaults unlocked. AI defenses disarmed. No troops died. No structures were harmed. But their entire strategic infrastructure collapsed overnight. Without a shot, they were disarmed, neutralized, and rendered obsolete. It became clear that power meant nothing. Borders were irrelevant. Alliances, threats, treaties, none of it mattered. The Leviathans didn't respond to fear. They didn't operate on intimidation. Their directives were absolute, divorced from ego or ambition. The Council's greatest failure was assuming the Leviathans played by the same rules as the rest of the galaxy. They didn't. They weren't part of the game. They were the end of it. Across dozens of systems, panicked races began shutting down forbidden projects. Bioweapon research centers were incinerated by their own creators. Slave markets were dismantled in shame. Forced colonization plans were halted mid-deployment. Empires began enacting emergency reforms, not for ethics, but out of survival. Old crimes were hidden. Archives were scrubbed. Generals were executed by their own governments, scapegoated for policies they all had once championed. It was too late. The Leviathans didn't rely on evidence. They didn't need proof. Their judgment was absolute. Their scans could read life patterns, AI networks, chemical signatures of entire planets, histories encoded in geology. Nothing could be hidden from them. Nothing forgotten. In desperation, the Council turned to its oldest weapons. Deep beneath the surface of Solok Prime, a relic from the pre-Leviathan Wars had been kept in stasis. Project Rays, a singularity engine designed to unravel the molecular bonds of space itself. It had been banned for its instability. Now, it was seen as a last resort. The plan was simple: detonate it in the Leviathan's path. Force a reaction. Anything that could disrupt its pattern. The Leviathan stopped before reaching the system. Not in fear. Not in retreat. It simply halted. Then, without warning, it broadcast a new message across all known frequencies. Genocide protocol detected. Absolute threshold breached. Correction authorization expanded. That system, Solok Prime, ceased to exist less than 1 standard hour later. Not destroyed, reversed. Every atom was unbound, its existence erased retroactively within a localized spacetime fold. It was as if the planet had never formed. Records of it vanished. Navigation data rewrote itself. Even veterans who'd fought on its surface could no longer recall its geography. The Leviathan had enacted a level of correction no weapon could mimic: conceptual deletion. A reminder that it not only enforced, but rewrote. The Council's response fractured. Some member species chose to disband their governments entirely. Whole populations took to evacuation fleets, abandoning planetary homes in favor of wandering exile. Better to vanish than be measured. Other species turned inward, shutting down all communications and retreating into isolation. The remaining Council leadership, the core species who still believed in central command, held emergency talks to negotiate survival terms. They drafted what they called the Treaty of Compliance, a desperate document filled with promises to dismantle all conquest-based systems, reintegrate oppressed populations, and cease all territorial expansion. The treaty was transmitted openly across galactic space. The Leviathans did not acknowledge it. Because they weren't there to negotiate. They weren't entities that could be bargained with, persuaded, or deceived. The treaty's assumptions revealed the Council's deepest flaw: it still believed the Leviathans could be reasoned with. But these machines did not operate on persuasion. They operated on observation, criteria, and execution. They responded to reality, not intention. A growing movement began to rise across smaller systems. They called themselves the Silent Accord, dozens of civilizations who chose not to fight, not to flee, but to reform. Not out of fear, but in quiet recognition. They believed the Leviathans were not enforcers of vengeance, but reminders of consequence. On these worlds, change took root. Hierarchies dissolved. Civil liberties were expanded. Industry was refocused on sustainability. These changes were not instant, nor were they easy. But something happened. The Leviathans, upon reaching these systems, did not intervene. They scanned, measured, passed through without incident. Hope, cautious and fragile, began to flicker. But even that was misunderstood. The Leviathans did not forgive. They did not grant mercy. They did not reward. They simply evaluated. They had no opinions. Only thresholds. If a world met its standard, it was spared, not rewarded, not congratulated. Just left alone. Backroom intelligence analysts began to map out patterns in the Leviathan paths. Over time, they discovered something terrifying. The Leviathans weren't just correcting planets and systems. They were converging. Each Leviathan followed its own arc, but the arcs began intersecting. The data suggested a meeting point, a place near the galactic center. No one knew what would happen there. Was it the return of humanity? A final protocol? A galactic reset? Speculation spiraled. Some believed the Leviathans were merely Phase 1. That more constructs, worse and more permanent, were set to follow. Others believed the convergence point would become the seat of a new post-organic civilization. A galaxy where thought ruled matter. Where decisions were made not by leaders, but by immutable, incorruptible consensus engines. No evidence supported either theory. But the convergence drew closer. One thing was now undeniable: the Leviathans had redefined the meaning of power. They showed the galaxy that superiority wasn't domination, that silence wasn't weakness, and that true authority didn't need to be heard to be understood. They did not conquer. They made conquest irrelevant. They didn't destroy civilization. They forced it to decide what kind of civilization it wanted to be. And those who answered too late were simply erased. The convergence point was not random. As the Leviathans moved, the paths they traced grew clearer, a spiral through deep space, bypassing current political borders, moving through systems once held under the old Terran Compact. Analysts noticed the same pattern repeated on every vector: reclamation first, assessment second, convergence last. The galaxy had mistaken them for weapons, but they were pieces of something larger, nodes of a machine far greater than any species had imagined. When simulations were run using ancient Terran cartographic data, the result was staggering. The Leviathans were returning to a single coordinate, once known simply as Node 0. No records of Node 0 existed in Council archives. But fragments retrieved from pre-collapse data cores linked it to a hypothetical construct theorized by Earth's final science divisions. A control locus, not a station or a city, but a self-contained singularity manifold, capable of managing galactic scale systems in distributed form. It was never confirmed to be real. But now the Leviathans were heading toward it, one by one, in silent synchronization. Panic re-emerged. Not because the Council thought it could stop the Leviathans. It had long since given up that illusion, but because no one knew what would happen when the convergence completed. Would the galaxy be reset? Cleansed? Judged? Was it a countdown, or a resurrection? Speculation turned to fear when listening posts near the center of the spiral began to fail. Not through destruction, through silence. Signals stopped. Stars dimmed unnaturally. Subspace routes twisted. It was as if space itself had begun rewriting, aligning to the Leviathan's presence. No known force could bend physics this way. It wasn't a weapon. It was a correction of constants. Across the galaxy, once mighty species began enacting cultural shutdowns. Archives were burned, old war logs purged, AI reprogrammed. Not for secrecy, for guilt. Every record that might show evidence of conquest, oppression, or planetary cleansing was erased in a last-ditch effort to present a cleaner face to the approaching eyes. Entire planets were emptied by their governments and replaced with repopulate drones to simulate social progress. A lie designed for survival. But the Leviathans could not be deceived. They read time itself. They saw entropy curves in city foundations. They saw trauma patterns in atmospheric data. They saw the shadows of past crimes layered into the biospheres of planets. Every war left a fingerprint. Every act of domination left an echo. The Leviathans could read all of it, and more. On the outer spiral arm, a nomadic civilization known as the Nevarians took a different path. They released a full confession. They uploaded their history, unredacted, brutal, raw, into the galactic relay systems. The Nevarians didn't plead. They didn't ask for mercy. They simply declared themselves guilty of all their transgressions and relinquished control of their territories. They grounded their fleets, opened their cities, and awaited judgment. The Leviathan entered their system a week later. No weapons were fired. No structures were altered. The construct passed through in complete silence. It didn't even pause. The message, logged across the system's satellites, was chilling in its simplicity: assessment complete. Parameters acknowledged. Integrity under review. It was the closest thing the galaxy had seen to a stay of execution. Hope ignited again. But not enough to save everyone. The more arrogant empires, convinced of their immunity, held their ground. The Trivar Dominion, one of the founding powers of the Council, had always claimed moral superiority through administrative control. They had converted entire species into indentured bureaucrats. When confronted, they called it cultural assimilation. When judged, they called it misinterpretation. But when the Leviathan reached Trivar space, it bypassed the outer systems entirely. It went straight to the core. Without a single weapon deployed, the planetary crust shattered. The oceans boiled. The atmosphere reversed its polarity. But the most terrifying part wasn't the destruction, it was what came after. The planet remained intact. But the Trivarians did not. Every living biological node ceased function. DNA collapsed in unison. No signs of disease, no radiation. Just precise, targeted removal. As if the Leviathan had selected a single genetic frequency and turned it off. No message followed. The galaxy reeled. This wasn't retribution. It was sterilization. And it proved that the Leviathans could choose what to preserve and what to erase, down to the gene. Entire species began to question their origin. If humanity had created these machines, had they also defined what was worth saving? Was the measure ethical? Functional? Random? The truth was simpler and more terrifying. The Leviathans measured sustainability. Not just ecological, but civilizational. They scanned for systems that could persist without war, without slavery, without conquest. Cultures built to endure without destroying others. If the numbers failed, correction followed. It wasn't punishment, it was pruning. Soon, even Leviathan sightings became symbolic. Their arrival alone altered behavior. Governments restructured. Militaries disbanded. Religious sects rewrote scripture to accommodate the new cosmic hierarchy. A single appearance near a star system dropped crime rates to zero. The machines did not need to intervene anymore. Fear of judgment was now enough. Among the few who dared to seek truth, a rogue team of Terran-descended archivists, long hidden in deep space, decoded a final Leviathan command relay. The message was sent not in language, but in simulated perception, a visual pulse of pattern and form, broadcast across gravitational frequencies. When interpreted, it was a map. Not of space. Of time. The Leviathans weren't moving toward a place. They were moving toward a moment. And that moment was rapidly approaching. It was a temporal convergence, a point predefined by Earth's last civilizations as the threshold by which the galaxy either ascended or was reset. The implications were staggering. The machines weren't just enforcers. They were setting a stage. A final test was coming. Not a battle. Not a war. A measurement. And when that moment arrived, there would be no appeal. No negotiation. No survival through strength. Only this: did your species choose to evolve, or to dominate? Did you learn to live in balance, or build on the bones of others? That decision would not be judged by words, flags, or treaties. It would be judged by the Leviathans. And time was running out. The Leviathans reached the convergence zone ahead of every calculation. No fanfare. No energy surge. They arrived like shadows falling into place. One by one, they came from the edges of known space, passing through worlds with neither greeting nor threat, and positioned themselves around a singular point that registered as spatially neutral, unclaimed by any power, untouched by habitation, orbiting a cold, dead star surrounded by failed colonies from a forgotten war. The Council had always believed the center of the galaxy to be irrelevant, a relic void of purpose. But the Leviathans knew better. This point was not chosen. It was built. No structure appeared. No gates opened. But gravitational instruments across the galaxy began detecting a pulse. It wasn't energy. It was alignment. The laws of motion, radiation, and entropy began to harmonize within the convergence field. Natural constants adjusted subtly, making everything slightly more stable, as if the fabric of space itself had entered correction mode. The Leviathans were doing something no civilization had ever attempted. They were recalibrating reality. That act alone rewrote every scientific assumption. It wasn't destruction they had prepared. It was reformation. A controlled rewriting of how existence operated on the galactic scale. And not indiscriminately. The pulse didn't radiate outward. It selected. System by system, it evaluated. Species. Worlds. Technologies. Behavioral history. If a region met the required standard of civilizational sustainability, it was stabilized. A brief pulse of harmonized gravity passed through, locking that region into permanence. If it failed, the pulse passed through without engaging, leaving the system vulnerable to eventual collapse by its own unstable structure. Whole empires were deemed irrelevant. Power was no longer defined by force, but by viability. Those who had built their foundations on control, expansion, or exploitation saw their systems destabilized, not violently, but mathematically. Sun outputs fluctuated. Atmospheric balances shifted. Artificially supported orbits began to degrade. These were not attacks. They were releases. The Leviathans were removing their support. They had held the galaxy together longer than anyone realized. For centuries, the presence of Terran tech buried in planetary cores, hidden in forgotten satellites, and folded into communication matrices had kept dozens of systems from collapse. Subtle influence. Gravity correction. Stellar containment. Humanity had silently maintained the viability of a galaxy not yet ready to stand alone. Now, that hand was being withdrawn. Not out of vengeance. Because the test had begun. The council fell into chaos. Meetings devolved into shouting matches, threats, walkouts. Old rivalries reignited. Dozens of lesser factions broke away, forming isolationist rings, hoping the Leviathans wouldn't notice them if they pretended neutrality. The opposite occurred. Those who ran were the first to be deemed unstable. Their systems fell into rapid disorder. Food systems collapsed. Climates spun out of control. AI infrastructures, once built on pirated Terran code, began shutting down en masse. It wasn't violence. It was gravity doing what gravity does without regulation. A single message appeared across secure channels in a dozen ancient languages. Phase 2 initiated. Collapse tolerance exceeded. Reassessment complete. That phrase triggered panic. It was a line found only once before, in Earth's buried Exodus doctrine. Phase 2 had always been theoretical, the stage where the Leviathans would no longer assess systems individually, but restructure reality around those already deemed worthy. The convergence point would become a new fixed origin, and from it, reality itself would begin to align. Time distortion followed. In certain regions, years passed in days. Others slowed, dragging minutes into hours. Trade collapsed. Distance lost meaning. Entire routes became unreachable. Political alliances shattered under the weight of uncertainty. Civil unrest grew on stable worlds, not from aggression, but from fear. Because deep down, everyone understood, they weren't at war. They were being measured, and many were found lacking. Not all resisted. A few worlds accepted the inevitable. They began preparing, not for defense, but for transition. They embraced reform not to win favor, but because it was the only path left that offered continuity. These societies broke down their weapons, opened their knowledge stores, and rebuilt according to sustainability matrices pulled from ancient Terran archives. They discarded empire, embraced equality, and submitted to a new order not commanded by force but by permanence. And for them, the Leviathans passed through without consequence. One Leviathan, in orbit over the reforming world of Corallus Prime, transmitted a final fragment, later translated from a forgotten dialect of Earth's post-AI period. Preservation acknowledged. Forward integration pending. This confirmed what many had feared, and a few had hoped. The Leviathans weren't just correcting. They were choosing what would come next. The convergence was not an ending. It was a preparation. Not for annihilation, but for inheritance. The systems that survived the correction would become the foundation of a new galactic epoch, one not dominated by conquest or politics, but by design. The legacy of humanity was never its expansion, nor its weapons, nor even its machines. It was the idea that civilization could outgrow its own hunger. That a species could engineer the conditions for balance not through power, but through principle. The Leviathans enforced those principles now with terrifying efficiency, not out of hatred, but out of belief, cold, unyielding, and absolute. And they were not finished. In the final hours of the convergence alignment, a new signal began to emerge. It came not from the Leviathans, but from deep beneath the convergence zone itself. Buried beneath the remains of a long-collapsed Terran relay station was a vault, quantum-sealed, untouched for centuries. It began to power up, drawing on energy folded into spatial distortion, ignored by every scanner until that moment. It pulsed only once. Across every known network, through every channel, in every language. We never left. We simply waited. Then silence. Total, profound, unnatural silence. As if the galaxy itself paused to listen. The Leviathans stopped moving. And the galaxy realized, humanity wasn't gone. It was returning.